8. It's true, I weep too much. Dawns break slow kisses on the eyelids of the sea, what other men sometimes have thought they've seen. And since then I've been bathing in the poem, lifting her shadowy flowers up for me, and hurled by hurricanes to a birdless place, the waving flags, nor pass by prison ships. Oh, let me burst and I be lost at sea, and fall on my knees then, womanly.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all here. You braved the fierce Los Angeles rain. Welcome to the Oculus Hall. My name is Darren Klein. I'm the Associate Director of Events and Programs here at the Broad Museum. Before we begin, I'll just remind you to silence your cell phones and remind you that photography and videography are not allowed during the program. Poetry and literature were central to the work of Jasper Johns, whose landmark exhibition, Something Resembling Truth, is on view here at the Broad through May 13th. If you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, I strongly recommend that you do. We here at the museum wanted to approach the authors whom Johns references in his paintings through the work of contemporary writers to explore how and if these writers have resonance in contemporary culture. The Broad recognized the opportunity to partner again with Aloud. In the past, we've co-presented conversations between filmmaker John Waters and Broad collection artist Jeff Koons, and CEO of the Rauschenberg Foundation, Christy McClare, and the Broad collection artist Shirin Nishat. We couldn't be more pleased with the work that our colleagues Louise Steinman, Maureen Moore, and Jen Dees did in selecting a group of writers to reflect upon the authors who inspired Jasper Johns. When the museum's founding director, Joanne Heiler, shared the planned exhibition-related programming with Jasper Johns himself, these literary programs truly struck a chord with him. This evening's Unfolding Language is the first in a two-part series, and I hope some of you will join us again on April 12th for an evening with Hanif Abdurakib, Brendan Constantine, and Amy Gersler, who you saw reading, or you heard reading a poem to go in that video. I will now welcome to the podium Louise Steinman, who is the Cultural Programs Director at the Library Foundation of Los Angeles and the curator of their Aloud series. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you so much. Good evening and welcome, everyone. The Aloud team and the Library Foundation are delighted to partner once again with the Broad, and I want to thank Ed Patuto and Ed Shad for the invitation, and thanks to Darren Klein for helping to make this interface between our teams hum along. It's been a pleasure, and we do hope that we'll see you all again on April 22nd for part 2 of this collaboration. Aloud is the signature public program of the Library Foundation, presenting bold thinkers and doers in all disciplines, and we'd love to tell you more about our work supporting the Los Angeles Public Library. You can join us for a free Aloud program almost every week of the year. We're just down Grand Avenue, I think it's that way, in the beautiful Central Library, and please pick up a postcard tonight with our spring calendar of events. Tonight we celebrate Jasper Johns' literary muses through the lens of 3 bold iconoclastic writers, Rigoberto González, Douglas Kearney, and Chris Kraus. Each of the writers has selected a writer to whom Johns paid homage in his own work, and we'll see some of those paintings, those works projected during the readings. And to Jasper Johns, if you're watching the live stream tonight from Connecticut, we salute you, we honor you, and we thank you for the inspiration. I'm going to keep these intros short. I'm going to introduce all 3 of our writers. You can read longer bios of them on our website. We're going to begin tonight with Rigoberto González, who's visiting us tonight from snowy New York. Rigoberto was born in Bakersfield, California, and raised in Michoacan, Mexico, and he's the author of several poetry books, a memoir, a book of stories, and 2 bilingual children's books. Among his many honors, a Lambda Literary Award and the Lenore Marshall Prize, his poetry has been cited for its signature authority, urgency, and necessity. You may have read his astute reviews in the Los Angeles Times, where he's a critic at large. He's a professor of English at Rutgers, and tonight he'll be reading and riffing on Hart Crane, whose poetry and tragic suicide resonated deeply with Jasper Johns. Our second presenter will be Douglas Kearney, who chose Samuel Beckett. Kearney, poet and performer and librettist, is the author of 6 books, most recently Buck Studies. He's received a Whiting Writers Award and residencies at Cave Canem and the Rauschenberg Foundation. Doug's innovative work uses fracture, fragment, textural abrasion and repetition, and sonic semantic wizardry to explore the illogic logic of our lives. And he teaches at CalArts. And our third and final reader tonight will be Chris Kraus, a filmmaker, art critic, the author of the boundary-breaking and hilarious autobiographical novel I Love Dick, Aliens and Anorexia, Torpor, Summer of Hate, and most recently, After Kathy Acker, a book that may or may not be a biography, among other texts. Chris was born in the Bronx, spent her teenage years in New Zealand, and moved to New York at 21 to become an artist. Her work has been praised for its, quote, damning intelligence, vulnerability, and dazzling speed. Tonight, Chris reads from her own work and reads from and ponders, as did Jasper Johns, the modernist writer Louis Ferdinand Céline. After our readings tonight, all of our writers will be signing their books right here, courtesy of our library store. And please join me in welcoming our first reader, Rigoberto González. Thank you.
Muy buenas tardes, muy buenas noches. I'm going to begin with a quote by the much beloved poet Gerald Stern, who said this about Hart Crane. Some, when they talk about Crane, emphasize his drinking, his chaotic life, his self-doubt, and the dangers of his sexual life. But he was able to manage these things, even though he died at 32, and create a poetry that was tender, attentive, wise, and radically original. And I thought I began with a kind of appeal to remember that quote, because when poets die in such a tragic way, their deaths become a mythology that sometimes overshadows their work. Another example of that would be Sylvia Plath, who took her life at the age of 30. But Sylvia Plath has had such a resurgence, especially through the feminist movement, that the work eventually overshadowed that other shadow. Right? With Hart Crane, it's been still the mythology of his death, the story of his life, continues to kind of take precedence over his work. Mostly because he's not taught it in schools anymore, and I think that he should be, because he's such an influential poet, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. I do, however, have to give some biographical details, because so much of that has fueled into the work and into the paintings that Jasper Johns created, influenced by Hart Crane's death. So Hart Crane was born in 1899 in Ohio. He was a son of a man who had a kind of syrup company, and this man also invented the lifesaver, if you remember those. But he sold the patent long before it became an actual brand. The business was still successful. This man married an aspiring opera singer, and she always begrudged the fact that she gave up this dream to be married to this businessman. That is an important thing to consider, because when after Harold Hart Crane was born, all he heard listening through his first 10 years of life were his parents either making love or fighting, mostly fighting. Right? Through this divorce that they eventually agreed upon, part of that gave Hart Crane the ability to live independently and move to New York. He was already coming out as a gay man, and so he needed to find a place to really explore that part of his sexuality. In Cleveland, Ohio, he was in the closet, having these clandestine affairs. So going to New York was the best thing. But he always came back to Cleveland to visit his mother. His mother, because every time he went away, his mother would write him these long letters asking him, please come back, please come back. And he would, and he would. During this time, he became a critic and a journalist. And the troubles, the money allowed him this space and freedom, but he was always tortured by a number of things. One was his sexuality. Another was this distance from his mother, who kept kept guilt-tripping him about leaving. And the more he expressed himself in this community of artists and intellectuals, the more focused he became in his work. His work was very disciplined. It engaged the landscape of the urban and also the rural landscapes or the natural landscapes. And part of the reason for that was that after his parents' divorce, his mother decided to take him away. She would always take him out of school to go on these trips together. Right? She was always trying to flee the husband. So they went on this cross-country trip on a train, and that was incredibly an important experience for the young Harold. Eventually, his right name became Hart Crane. Those are his two last names, and it was also an influence by his mother. His mother said, well, you can't be Harold Crane because that's your name and that's your father's name. Where's my name? Right? So he decided to write under the name of Hart Crane. Now comes the difficult part, and that's his struggles with his sexuality and the way that he sort of believed that his aggrieved nature, his aggrieved experiences would somehow fuel the energy that he put into his work. And so he got into a lot of trouble. His drinking became worse and worse, his alcoholism. He ended up at one point, he was in jail 6 years in Paris or somewhere in France for getting into a brawl. And so suddenly, this big gift at the age of 31 happened. He received the Guggenheim fellowship and he decided to go to Mexico, which is why Mexico and particularly Cuba and parts of that landscape play such a role in his work. He loved everything on the water. He loved the sea. There was something about the sea and its freedom, its largeness, its ability to allow him to get lost and to escape. Right? So the sea plays a very prominent, and water plays a prominent role in his work, which is why you see that reflected in the paintings. And when I saw Periscope, I've been seeing this image all the time that I've been preparing this conversation. But when I finally saw it for the first time, I was almost embarrassed, and I'm usually not embarrassed by this, but I had a very emotional moment where I wept, because all of a sudden I understood what that hand, if you can see it, what the image of the hand, and Jasper Johns imagined that as the hand of Hart Crane as he was descending into the sea. He jumped on he was coming back from Mexico after 1 year. It was a very tumultuous time for him. He was having all kinds of thwarted affairs, and he decided that he was going to get married to a woman. It was his only sort of documented heterosexual relationship, and he was going to do this for some reason. He was going to get married and live as a heterosexual. And on the ship, he discovered how hard that was going to be, because he would get drunk, and then he would make passes at the sailors, at the men, and that's how he got beat up. And we don't know exactly why he jumped. But we know that the torture of this life, and perhaps the intensity that he placed into his work, finally caught up with him, right? And I respond to Hart Crane in that way. I love that landscape. The Bridge, his most famous work, was an answer to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And unlike The Wasteland, he wanted to have a more positive sort of spin in the work. Like he acknowledged the difficulties and the dangers and the threats of living on this earth, but somehow he had to place some light at the end of the journey. So I'm going to read one of his poems, and this is the poem that Gerald Stern, the poet that I quoted earlier, said changed his life. And so you'll hear that journey, you'll hear the landscapes of Hart Crane. Eternity. The epigraph is a Barbadian adage. September, remember. October, all over. And this is a poem that references the aftermath of a hurricane in the Caribbean. After it was over, though still gusting balefully, the old woman and I foraged some drier clothes and left the house, or what was left of it. Parts of the roof reached Yucatan, I suppose. She almost, even then, got blown across lots at the base of the mountain. But the town, wires in the streets and Chinamen up and down with arms in slings, plaster strewn dense with tiles, and Cuban doctors, troopers, trucks, loose hens. The only building not sagging on its knees, Fernandez's hotel, was requisitioned into pens for cotted Negroes, bandaged to be taken to Havana on the first boat through. They groaned. But was there a boat? By the wharf's old site, you saw 2 decks unsandwiched, split 60 feet apart, and a funnel high and dry up near the park where a frantic peacock rummaged amid heaped cans. No one seemed to be able to get a spark from the world outside. But some rumor blew that Havana, not to mention poor Batabano, was halfway underwater with fires for some hours since, all wireless down, of course, there too. Back at the erstwhile house, we shoveled and sweated, watched the ogre sun blister the mountain, stripped now bare of palm everything, the lick of grass as black as patent leather, which the rimed white wind had glazed. Everything gone, or strewn in riddled grace. Long tropic roots high in the air like lace, and somebody's mule steamed, swaying right by the pump. Good God, as though his sinking carcass there were death predestined. You held your nose already along the roads, begging for buzzards, vultures. The mule stumbled, staggered. I somehow couldn't budge to lift the stick for pity of his stupor. For I remember still that strange gratuity of horses, one ours and one a stranger, creeping up with dawn out of the bamboo brake through howling, sheeted light when the storm was dying. And Sarah saw them too, sobbed, yes, now it's almost over. For they know the weather's in their noses. There's dawn, but that one, white, I can't account for him. And true, he stood like a vast phantom, maned by all the memoried night of screaming rain. Eternity. Yet water. I beat the dazed mule toward the road. He got that far and fell dead or dying, but it didn't so much matter. The morrow's dawn was dense with carrion hazes, sliding everywhere. Bodies were rushed into graves without ceremony, while hammers patterned in town. The roads were being cleared, injured, brought in, and treated, it seemed. In due time, the president sent down a battleship that baked something like 2,000 loaves on the way. Doctors shot ahead from the deck in planes. The fever was checked. I stood a long time in Max talking New York with the gobs, Guantanamo, Norfolk, drinking Bacardi and talking USA. And you can see how that has resonance now with this, at least for me, and with the hurricane in Puerto Rico. Right? So I'm a different poet in a very different time. Still, I respond to Hart Crane's large, inclusive landscapes, and I wrote this poem about water as well. But I'm also the child of T.S. Eliot, so mine's a little more on the dark side. This poem from my next book is called Tsunami. There's a man who sits on the shore every morning, staring at the sea, but he doesn't have any sons left. They disperse like a pool of fish when the sinker strikes the surface of the water. The eldest took the family boat, the middle son the net, the youngest claimed the rods, the lines and hooks, stripping their father of his fisherman's estate, though he wasn't dead yet. His burden was a stroke that left him trapped inside a body, a tackle box that lost its key. A mermaid chewed on the tips of her hair like seaweed before scampering up the sand just to fling a mussel shell against his skull. He didn't move, but inside he felt elated that for once an object came towards him instead of floating away like everything else, like everything his wife had brought him. Kisses, kitchens, sons, the scent of jasmine on her hands and feet, she dragged into the tide their home. No, the entire street, the village, uprooting lampposts and eucalyptus trees, now obscene with earthworms, their moistness desperate at the separation from the soil. His fingers had twitched just so as he reached for his beloved who sank into the sea. The landscape of train of a gown that swirled around after her. Everybody drowned. Oh, figurehead of tragedy, oh, ravenous water god that snatches the air out of every lung. After centuries of villagers taking from your belly, you had to claim it all back. Each hard-won catch, each gasp from a child whose first fish changes color in the bucket, each bone stuck to the throat, and every story that followed. But your wrath hungered for more than that. Each blessing over the soup, each time a man touched his bride beneath the table during prayer, each time a man caressed another man in the dark, every blush born of such affection and every encounter with pleasure that ended with a mouth savoring its secret into daylight. Give it to me, said the sea. Every glimpse of your woman's nipple as she fed each of your sons, every bristle of your lover's beard found on the pillow and which you fondled while the dawn peeked through the blinds, every ray of light, every time you heard the coffee boiling on the stove and thought, what a lucky man am I. I have everything. I have it all. No, you arrogant fool. I have it all. Your yesterday, the days before, and the days ahead. I swallowed every minute you sit there begging to get something back. I pick my teeth with your disappointment. Some might think it cruel that I let you live, yet you, the one without a voice. But what use is a voice when no one heeds the warnings? Your kind gave me such taste for waste that it became addiction. And like any dog or snake, I gave in to my rage when you weren't paying attention, when you stood above me like a master and gazed at the horizon as if you owned as far as your eyes could reach. And I barked, and I hissed, and told you that I too could play that game, but you wouldn't listen. What? Is that a tear I see? Is it plump with shame or regret? I'll savor it just the same. You sinking into the ruins is the story. You unheard is your fate and mine. Now you know what it's like to be me. You can whisper, scream. It's pointless. Nobody gives a fucking shit. I wanted to, how am I doing in time? I have about 5 minutes. I'm done? Okay. Now, I want to say just a few closing remarks. Thank you. After, of course, Hart Crane's body was never recovered from that, and but a plaque was erected at the grave of his father in Ohio. There was a marker which added to the tombstone, and it reads, Hart Crane, Harold Hart Crane, 1899, 1932, lost at sea. And I like to believe that those of us who remember his work, those of us who are inspired by his work, those of us who create after reading his work or encountering his work, bring him back home. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much.
Damn it. Please, one more time for Rigoberto. Thank you all for being here. I'd say that you were all very sweet for being here, but sugar melts in the rain. Good evening, folks. It took me a long time to shake the sense that tonight we were tasked to talk about how an author in dialogue with Jasper Johns influenced us. I am confident that we are not expected to speculate why Johns chose the authors Johns chose, nor, heaven forbid, research what scholars have already recorded of this. In choosing Beckett, however, I have a chance to talk a little about both of these things, as I encountered Beckett with a closer interest in grad school at Cal Arts, and that I've taught from his work, namely play and catastrophe, for the same institute's theater school. Further, Johns and Beckett collaborated on the artist book, Forêt. I'm a patriot, I can't pronounce French. Thus, their connection is a bit explicit. As Marjorie Perloff helpfully observes in The Space of a Door, Beckett in the Poetry of Absence, Forêt translates mildly into fizzle, suggesting, quote, farts, hissing sounds, failures, end quote, rather than the more precise, quote, shit or diarrhea. Forêts then are something associated with toilets, heads, or Johns. Scatological, sadly, doesn't mean shit logic, unless we insert a suppository-like hyphen, which fixes it by way of loosening the word into the conjoined pair scatological. The pun, when used in signifying, I've described as shit talk that allowed black folk who were legally and socially shit folk to talk shit and not just take shit without ending up in deep shit. Scatological, in its classical unity, denotes an interest in excrement, what is cast off after digestion, a biological synthesis we've found to have a fertile analogy in consideration of consumer culture. Shit is low, low brow, low and brown, the kitsch and awkward bauble, the motley and cobbled tchotchke, the outlandish, what Fred Moten calls the outwork. It is what makes messes and thus transgresses. Scatological, as a pair of words, could be bent to suggest shit logic, a means of thinking not strictly irrational, but drawn productively toward failure, or mess as a means of teeming meaning. Verb, yes. Noun, yes. Beckett's work has been associated with failure and, in Perloff's book, indeterminacy. My renewed interest in Beckett, animated, number one, by his short plays, which provide a slant model for the micro-operas I've been thinking at, with hopes to think through, has its number two, this shit talk. But as this relates to the specifics of Beckett's and Johns, I quit Foreds and return to the mildness of fizzles. I quit also for a moment my interest in deuces and move on to fives. Fizzle number 5, or closed place. Like the other fizzles in Beckett's series of 6, can be described generically as a prose poem. An approach as capacious, it seems, as all get out. I can't say I fully understand how best to be in most prose poems, but I find that when I write one that feels at all on track, I get a balance of the horizontal and vertical, an atmosphere as content and context, along with a motion, flickering, repetitive, or perhaps propulsive, that feels closer to narrative than I can manage in my other poems. Number 5 plays out the tensions of directed momentum with recursion familiar in Beckett's work. I'm thinking here of Not I and its stutter. Plays interdigitated love triangle and directive to start again upon reaching its end. What's what, and not's not, Crap's last tape, and the titular character's tragic resistance to the inevitable by way of fast forwarding toward moments of memory through the titular medium. And again, number 5. It's a wind tunnel and climbing wall in this regard, and now seems a fine moment to meet one of the evening's shore directives. I will read number 5, which I hope facilitates a transition from this mode of response to Beckett into one perhaps a bit less like a lecture, even one as slack as this. And now, fizzle number 5. Closed place. All needed to be known, for say, is known. There is nothing but what is said. Beyond what is said, there is nothing. What goes on in the arena is not said. Did it need to be known, it would be. No interest, not for imagining. Place consisting of an arena and a ditch. Between the two skirting the latter, a track. Closed place. Beyond the ditch, there is nothing. This is known because it needs to be said. Arena, black, vast. Room for millions, wandering and still. Never seeing, never hearing one another. Never touching. No more is known. Depth of ditch? See from the edge all the bodies on its bed. The millions still there. They appear 6 times smaller than life. Bed divided into lots, dark and bright. They take up all its width. The lots, still bright, are square. Appear square. Just room for the average sized body, stretched out diagonally. Bigger, it has to curl up. Thus, the width of the ditch is known. It would have been in any case. Some, the bright lots, the dark. Outnumber the former. The place is already old. The ditch is old. In the beginning, it was all bright lots, almost touching, faintly edged with shadow. The ditch seems straight. Then reappears a body seen before, a closed curve, therefore. Brilliance of the bright lots. It does not encroach on the dark. Adamantine blackness of these, as dense at the edge as at the center, but vertically it diffuses unimpeded, high above the level of the arena, as high above as the ditch is deep. In the black air towers of pale light, so many bright lots of so many towers, so many bodies visible on the bed. The track follows the ditch all the way along, all the way around. It is on a higher level than the arena, a step higher. It is made of dead leaves, a reminder of bedlam nature. They are dry, the heat and the dry air, dead but not rotting, crumbling into dust rather, just wide enough for one. On it no two ever meet. A note. In the Johns Beckett collaboration, which elides fizzle number 4, I gave up before birth, bedlam has been misprinted as beldam. Or perhaps, in the Perloff, beldam was misprinted as bedlam. Of the fizzles mounted in the exhibition, number 5 struck me the most. I've long enjoyed the bitten-off syntax Beckett employs. It reminds me of chopped samples, a hip-hop compositional technique I encountered before reading a long passage from What in grad school at CalArts. Hip-hop's chopped approach, contrasted to the looped approach, involves cuts of pre-recorded material, typically shorter than the extended sample used in a loop, and rearranges them to create progressions and sonic juxtapositions that do not exist in the source material. So, Beckett had my ear in that regard. In my statement on Beckett, composed for this event's marketing, I remarked, his bleakness somehow teems. In the short plays I've encountered, his syntax accumulates, seems a heap of hewn bramble in which sudden utterances are thorns playing berries. This program gives me impetus to rummage deeper and maybe get cut a bit sweet. And you're all here. That was me what did that shit. And the rest of our marketing. I would refine bleakness here and suggest instead austerity. For while chopped or hewn production can often result in rich and deep music, what I am drawn to in Beckett and what I find myself attempting in part in his spirit reaps away a certain kind of surface lushness. The language becomes not parched, but stretched. It make does with what it do. Number 5. Number 5 does another thing that pulls me to it. That arena. I hear Tom Waits squall, "In the Coliseum," as I write this. The arena. The site of spectacle, violence, spectacular violence, ritual, and entertainment. That site of indeterminate content, yet overdetermined purpose. To gather many to see and hear a thing. We call them as we see them. The same thing. And what kind of thing? And now the national anthem. See? The flag, perhaps John's flags, in triplicate, like non-disclosure agreement or waiver. Better, 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 yet, yet, yet. Wet, 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 oh, glare, 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 glare. Dawn's early light, 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 light. The flesh then up and down the field, so tiny from here. The meat meeting other meat. The meat sings. The meat dances. The meat has something to tell us. And what kind of thing? Beckett's terse phrasing cuts us such that I glimpse the millions of dead through your fingers. Or mob of people bustle the eye line. Millions occluded, intervene, goes our sight. Alas, intervene, occluded, goes our sight. Thank God. Into the ditch, into the dirt. When then it gets too much to see the little we see, hand us the schematics. Voila! They appear square, blocks, the brutal abstraction, the brutal schematics. Remind me here of the architectural drawing, Thomas Clarkson's draft of the bad ship Brooks, that tool of abolitionism. In the Brooks, we see this, the Negro as cargo. This how the bodies go, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then Beckett goes, just room for the average size body, appearing square, a blocking, a show. Look, yes, where the blocks go, the bodies. No, but a cinematography, movement, on your marks, yes, up, yes, unimpeded, high above, yes, a mechanical rapture, an automaton lifting its eyes to the hills from which no help comes. And I wonder whether bedlam or beldam. I wonder whether nature an asylum or nature a malicious and ugly woman. You pick. I picked number 5 also because it opened for me a way to approach something the poet Carl Phillips does in his collection Double Shadow. Here I find his study of the classical world seems most vivid in the periphery of poems. Centered in the body as it exists under powers, sometimes internal desire, sometimes external violence. In Double Shadow, the Hellenic Arcadia and the Centaur seemed haunted sites of rememory, a la Toni Morrison's beloved formulation as amplified by Ed Plavlich's essay about a DJ spinning of social vortices. Reaching out at Phillips' work, I meant to come into contact with something other than mimicry. All I managed was sinewy syntax and cheap illusion. The marble of his flesh, of his language, isn't just stone, but I recall a prized cut of meat. Our teeth sinks into it. What's left? Throw into the ditch, into the dirt. Johns is Beckett. The way down, way the ways. You some sooty cooter. Some hinge whence to get open. Closed, space, enclosed. Stone cold flag stuck dimmed, slow. What shall shuck a shutter? Hinge? Steady against what light? Tear a hue, pinned to a wincing hair. The stain of the arena. The blood in its architectural mouth. Down its dirt throat, the stain a kind of resonance, Beckett's merciless seeing it an insistence, but witness occluded. You won't see all of this. You ain't seen shit yet. So that's the talk part. Thank you. So I'm just going to read a couple of poems. Some really short ones that I feel might say something to Beckett. And then finally I'm going to end with my own poem about an arena, but we'll get to it. So 3 super short poems. The title of the first one is Having Cut Off Their Hands. Having cut off their hands, what did they leave there? Just knives and fists the reaped yield. When down came rain, what grew among rows, awry, engorged bowls, or picked that slow fall of mangled snow? Having drowned their lovers, the river turned first to honey, then flies, tried lips swollen with vows. We'll never leave. No, never leave. How those thousand wings of quavering night buffet dawn away. Having cooked their babies, on flaming eyes they left the kettles, smoke like black balloons filling those 2 silent kitchens. And I'm going to close with Ing. And the arena in Ing is the fabulous Forum in Inglewood, which many people in here are probably, if not long time, recent Angelinos, and so know that Inglewood has the distinction of being in the flight pattern of the great silver-bellied air condor. It's one of the rarest birds. We've had to cultivate a lot of them to keep them, alive because they were endangered at different points. There's a group you may have heard of. They're an obscure group from the 70s, mostly the Eagles. All right. So this is my own arena, and I'm gonna shut up and I'm gonna bring up Chris Kraus. It's a flight path up and out forum. Departure to be out for the up. White clouds on a dungaree up. On some flight, some path out the up. White rides out on a fast. Departure to the out. A flight path. Wall the steel gulls of belly full of flight. Steel gulls smoke the dungaree sky up. Yellow clouds on the acid wash. The white out. Arrivals to the inn. Gulls. A bus. Bucks lean with boxes. An Impala, a buck, a Buick. A flight path dungs the block. Boxes chalk up with the inn. Gulls block the dungaree up. An unkindness of flight. A path blocked. Bucks and bucks buck on blocks. Low flight. A bus belly full of arrival. Departure. Smoke clouds the low path. The forum chalks the block up. No path for Buicks, Impalas. Wall to wall of cars. Trucks, buses from out on in. The path full. Fabulous forum. The up and in from out. The down and out and in. A block blocked, man. A flight past steel gulls like gull dung on the yellow wash dungaree sky. Tickets, got no tickets, no departure. Steel bucks the blocks down. Up the gulls like a murder flight. Nah. Lolos on arrival, the block chalk, no path for Buicks, Impalas, Lolos, now, wall to wall of cars, trucks, buses from out on in, block the path, man, fabulous form, the up and in from out, the down and out and in, blocks deep, the forum gone dark, as the dark blocks bucked up, white smoke on arrival Impala, low, buck, the wall boxes full up, the fulvous up gulps, the steel gulls out and in, hawks up copters, choppers hawk the dungaree sky up and down the path, man, hawk the blocks, fill up boxes with Impalas and lows, wash the down and out and in and out, fabulous departures for him, fixing to unblock a flight path for the up and in from out in, fabulous arrivals, back, the forum, dark till eagles, you can check in, watch up the white clouds, slow arrival, you can leave. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there's this painting that Jasper Johns made in 1978 called Celine. And it's James, the new cover, the Ralph Manheim translation. It came out again recently with the new cover. And I think they actually ripped part of that painting, the new cover. It's very striking, the new cover. It's just a hand as if pressed up against a glass wall. And you can see that there in the painting. It's no coincidence, I don't think, that Jasper Johns was influenced by Celine. Celine's work, his first novel, Journey to the End of the Night, was published in France in 1932, and his work started to come out in English in 1952. And it made a huge impact on writers in New York. So not just Johns, but all of his contemporaries were reading and talking about Celine. He was a huge influence on William Burroughs, on Bill Roth, who called him my Proust. And I guess, you know, Celine is best known or has become notorious for his anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism of his later work. I didn't really want to get into that tonight. I want to read from his first novel, Journey to the End of the Night, that pretty much covers the events of the first third of the 20th century in a picaresque and hilarious fashion. It begins in the killing fields of World War I. It moves to colonial Africa, and from there to a Ford assembly line, and it ends, fittingly enough, in a mental asylum. Along the way, the character Bartholomew becomes, like Celine himself, a medical doctor. Celine lived in a suburb of Paris called Meudon, and he treated the poor in this neighborhood for many years. Being a doctor gave him a tremendous insight into not just the physicality of human nature, but human nature in all of its kind of grotesque finality, especially living in a neighborhood where people were living in such a marginal way and so close to the bone. I think what marks Celine more than anything else is his incredibly scathing black comedy. And what is comedy if not the thing that takes place in the space between what people say is happening and what we know is really happening? Comedy is the work that kind of dares to say what we're all thinking, but nobody quite dares to say. So I'm going to read a little bit from Journey, the part about World War I. Also, I guess one last influence, later influence of Celine would be on Kurt Vonnegut. And this surprised me. I was kind of researching it just before this. But Vonnegut said that Slaughterhouse-Five was in a sense, made possible by reading this book. And the phrase that runs throughout Slaughterhouse-Five, every time somebody dies, and so it goes, and so it goes, he got that straight from Celine. It's the crazy absurdity that surfaced in World War I of this kind of, automatic killing machine. Everybody's out there killing each other. They have no reason. They have no understanding why. So let me start with Journey. Night after idiotic night, we crept from ambush to ambush, sustained only by the decreasingly plausible hope of coming out alive, that and no other. And if we did come out alive, one thing was sure, that we'd never, absolutely never, forget that we had discovered on Earth a man shaped like you and me, but 1,000 times more ferocious than the crocodiles and sharks with wide open jaws that circled just below the surface around the shiploads of garbage and rotten meat that get chucked overboard in the Havana roadstead. The biggest defeat in every department of life is to forget, especially the things that have done you in, and to die without realizing how far people can go in the way of crumminess. When the grave lies open before us, let's not try to be witty, but on the other hand, let's not forget, but make it our business to record the worst of human viciousness we've seen without changing one word. When that's done, we can curl up our toes and sink into the pit. That's work enough for a lifetime. In the 4 weeks the war had been going on, we'd grown so tired, so miserable, that tiredness had taken away some of my fear. In the end, the torture of being harassed night and day by those monsters, the non-coms, especially the low-ranking ones, who were even stupider, pettier, and more hateful than usual, made even the most obstinate among us doubt the advisability of going on living. Oh, how you long to get away, to sleep, that's the main thing. When it becomes really impossible to get away and sleep, then the will to live evaporates of its own accord. Seeing we were still alive, we just have to look as if we were looking for our regiment. Before a thought can start up in the brain of a jughead, a lot of cruel things must happen to him. The man who made me think for the first time in my life, really think, practical thoughts that were really my own, was undoubtedly Major Pincon, that torture master. I therefore thought of him as hard as I could as I clanked along, crushed by the weight of my armor, an extra in this incredible international extravaganza, into which, I have to admit, I had leapt with enthusiasm. Every yard of darkness ahead of us was a promise of death and destruction. But how would it come? The only element of uncertainty was the uniform of the killer. Would he be one of us or one of them? The men in my party didn't express themselves very well. Actually, they hardly spoke at all. They'd come from the ends of Brittany, and what they knew they hadn't learned at school but in the army. That night, I tried to make a little conversation about the village of Barbigny with the one next to me. His name was Kersuzan. Kersuzan, I say, we're in the Ardennes now. Do you see anything in the distance? I don't see a damn thing. It's as black as an asshole, Kersuzan says. That was enough. But I suggest, haven't you heard anyone mention Barbigny in the course of the day? Give you an idea where it is? No, that was that. We never did find Barbigny. We went around in circles until morning and ended up in another village where the man with the field glasses was waiting for us. The general was taking his black coffee in the arbor outside the mayor's house when we got there. Ah, Pincon, he says in a loud voice to his chief of staff as he sees us pass. Youth is so wonderful. After that, he went out for a leak and then stooped over, his hand behind his back. He took a little stroll. The general was very tired that morning, the orderly confided to me. He'd slept badly, some trouble with his bladder, so it seemed. Kersuzan always gave me the same answer when I questioned him at night, as if I'd pressed a button. It kind of tickled me. 2 or 3 times more, he said the same thing about the asshole darkness, and a while after that he was killed on his way out of some village we'd mistaken for some other village by some French soldiers who'd mistaken us for somebody else. It was a few days, I remember now, after Kersuzan was killed that we dreamed up a little trick that suited us fine to keep from getting lost in the darkness. So they were throwing us out of the billet. All right, we don't say a word, no griping, no comeback. Clear out, old Waxface yelled as usual. Yes, sir, very good, sir. And off we'd go in the direction of the gunfire. We didn't wait to be asked twice, all 5 of us. You'd have thought we were going to pick cherries. It was rolling country around there, the moose with its vine-covered hills, grapes that weren't ripe yet, and autumn, wooden villages well-dried by 3 months of summer, highly inflammable. We'd noticed that one night when we couldn't figure out where to go, there was always a village burning in the direction of the gunfire. We didn't go too close. We gave that village a wide berth and just watched like an audience, so to speak, from maybe 7 or 8 miles away. And every night from then on, all kinds of villages would burst into a blaze on the horizon. One after another, we'd be surrounded by them, dozens of burning villages in a circle, up ahead and on both sides like a crazy carnival, sending up flames that licked the clouds. We'd watch the flames as they swallowed up everything, churches and barns, one after another. The haystacks burned higher and livelier than anything else. The beams reared up in the darkness, throwing off sparks before crashing into a sea of light. Even from 10 or 15 miles away, you could get a good view of the burning village. It was a merry sight. A tiny hamlet that you wouldn't even notice in the daytime, with ugly, uninteresting country around it, You can't imagine how impressive it can be when it's on fire at night. You'd think it was the Notre Dame. A village, even a small one, takes at least all night to burn. In the end, it looks like an enormous flower. Then there's only a bud, and after that, nothing. Smoke rises, and then it's morning. We'd leave the horses settled in a field close by, and they wouldn't move. We'd go and saw wood in the grass, all but one, naturally, who'd take his turn as guard. But when you've got fires to watch, the night passes a lot more pleasantly. It's not a hardship anymore. You're not alone. Unfortunately, the villages didn't last. After a month's time, there wasn't a village left in that neck of the woods. The forests were shelled too. They didn't last a week. Forests make nice enough fires, but they don't last. After that, the roads were all clogged with artillery columns going in one direction and civilians running away in the other. So naturally, we couldn't go either way. We could only stay where we were. We'd lined up for the privilege of getting killed. Even the general couldn't find any billets with no soldiers in them. In the end, we were sleeping in the fields, general or no general. Those who still had a bit of spirit lost it. That was when they started shooting men to bolster their morale, whole squadrons. And when our MP got a citation for the way in which he was carrying on his own little private war, the real honest-to-goodness war. That's pretty great. And I know he's such a fantastic writer. There's this, I was reading the book just before now, and there was one phrase that was just so astonishingly great. He describes a doctor's eyes somewhere along the way as made out of supernatural velvet. So that was fantastic. I'm going to read a little bit from the end of my third novel, Torpor. And I wouldn't say that I was directly in any way influenced by Celine, but I would definitely say that I was influenced by people who were influenced by him. The writer Gary Indiana has said over and over again how influenced he was by Celine, and I think, definitely I was writing somewhat in the shadow of some of Gary's work when I was writing this part of the book. I'm not going to give you the whole backstory. Suffice to say, it's a road trip set in 1991. A couple, Jerome and Sylvie, have been doing a kind of road trip around the former Eastern Bloc. He was a child survivor of the Holocaust. They're a married couple. He's considerably older than she is. She wants to have a child. They haven't had a child. She thinks this is their chance to adopt a Romanian orphan, their last chance to have a child. He thinks it's his chance to see the old Europe before it changes forever. It's not a very successful trip. The last chapter, she leaves New York where they lived and she moves to LA. And the chapter before is called Worse, and the last chapter of the book is called Better. The dog will die, and Sylvie will know she has to leave then. Still, it'll be another several years before she leaves Jerome. Eventually, a friend will offer a part-time job teaching in an LA art school. She'll see it as a chance. She'll take it. Jerome will stay in New York. Just before his 60th birthday, he'll enter therapy. In between these sessions, he starts having or remembering very vivid dreams. Sometimes he writes these dreams down in a notebook. I'm in a restaurant with Sylvie, and I give a $20 bill at the counter, expecting to get some change. But we're kept waiting, and Sylvie leaves. I think of leaving, too. Sylvie always leaves large tips. But I wait, because the dinner only costs $6 or $7. I find myself in a kind of Roman theater with many people lying down, wrapped in white togas. The light is overexposed, white on white, like the amazing pictures by Günter Bruce, the elegant actionist work I saw in Vienna. Faces are white, too. These people are all friends of Sylvie's, and they're making fun of me or being critical. I feel kind of lost, don't know what I'm doing there and what they expect of me. It's some kind of carnival. One of them says, "This man has no heart. He has a heart in radium." It's getting late, and I have to go back downtown to the East Village. But other people, young people, offer to share a cab with me, and I gladly accept. And then he adds, I had this dream at my mother's place in Paris on November 24th, a Sunday, after talking to her about her father, who took refuge in Radom when the Germans were about to occupy Warsaw. In Radom, he was put into a transit camp with his own father, and both were eventually sent to their deaths on a transport, destination yet unknown. I immediately thought that radium was Radom, but radium is also used in atomic bombs, and I remember reading things about Chernobyl. But heart in radium also makes me think of the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, the man who has no heart. He's white, too, and clownish. So the statement is contradictory. At once, I have no heart, and I have a heart in radium, radom. So the second accusation may well be my own answer to the first. Yes, I have a heart, but it is in radom. I only feel for things that connect me to the camps. The statement was a statement of fact, but polemic. It may have to do with the conversation I had on the phone earlier that day with Sylvie. She was angry, and she told me I have no heart. My answer is that I have a heart, but it's caught in radium. And to prove that I have a heart, I answer with this dream. Yes, I have a heart. I have an unconscious, because I dream and play with words in a meaningful way. The heart also connects to my past, the tuberculosis and infection of my heart. Your cells have a memory, the homeopath said, after too strong an emotional fight with Junie and Laura. Back to the problem of remembering things and dreaming. My inability to dream has to do with the camps. They infect me. I try to tear them away from my chest, but I can't. It's where my heart is, and I have to stop bleeding. But this bleeding heart is a heart, and is all that I have. Whatever I can do will come from that. The same year Jerome enters therapy, his old friend Henri Lachman hangs himself in Paris in a suburban park. Like Jerome, Henri had been a hidden child throughout the war. Because Jerome has decided now to take an active interest in his past, he goes to visit Henri's widow, Mireille, the next time he's in Paris. He brings a tape recorder to record their conversation. But when he turns it on, though he's normally a great interviewer, Jerome can't think what to say. Finally, he asks, "What do you remember?" Mireille considers this. In the days before his death, Henri seemed neither more nor less depressed than usual. He'd recently gotten a part-time job teaching sociology to Algerian immigrants at a night school. This post was a far cry from the brilliant future once imagined for him by his dissertation supervisor, Henri Lefebvre. But then again, Henri had never finished writing his PhD. His life had trailed off into something much more inconclusive. He'd never been that interested in pursuing a career. A few weeks before her husband's suicide, Mireille recalls, the youngest child moved out, but happily. Surely it could not be this. You know, Mireille recalls, there was a strange way Henri used to talk. He was never good at making plans. I mean, he talked about himself as if there was no future, the way most people do. There was this funny tense he used, as if the future had already happened. He always said, "I would have been." Alone and weightless in LA, Sylvie buys a 67 Rambler and rents a house in Highland Park. She goes to the gym and finds that working out transports her to a teary, universally empathic state. Without Jerome, she's simply sad for sadness now. Her trainer screams at her to eat. Sylvie doesn't like the landscape in LA. She doesn't like the art. She doesn't like the West Coast Jews who hardly seem like Jews at all. Her female colleagues dressed like aging sluts. She doesn't like the clothes. In New York, she'd seen the people she'd loved and admired most die of poverty and heroin overdoses, suicide and AIDS. The drag queens Nan Goldin photographed in the 80s were mostly dead of AIDS and Hep C. There'd been a battle to hold back the flood of gentrification on the Lower East Side of New York. This battle had been lost. The LA art world Sylvie moves around in is free of arcane references and ambiguity. There are no alternate hierarchies of glamour here. Those who work outside the gallery system are simply losers. Any artist any good will be professional. All it takes is social skills and an MFA from the right school. Her new art world associates wear Bermuda shorts and barbecue on Sunday afternoon. No one flaunts ambition in your face. Everyone is either married, single, or divorced, though most of them are married. Things coast along. It occurs to Sylvie there's a great deal of money in LA and very little competition. In some ways, LA is as provincial as the small New Zealand city she grew up in, but with vastly higher stakes. No one cares enough to question anyone too much. She sees it might be possible to benefit from this. Nothing important that happens to Sylvie happens in the city of LA. Everything happens in her head. In the months before she left Jerome, she started writing love letters to a man who didn't love her. In LA, she continues writing to this man, and then she just continues writing. For the first time, it seems that everything she wants to do can now be broken down into small, achievable goals. She embraces everything that's practical and finite. A therapist in Beverly Hills gives her excellent advice about success in business. Never put anything into writing. See each transaction through the eyes of your opponent. Assess what people want, then give it to them. Then you will be left alone. Never say no to anyone. Just say, I'll think about it, and then stop returning calls. Sylvie follows this advice. It works. It occurs to Sylvie that she'd be less lonely if she started having sex. But no one in the LA art world ever fucks or even flirts unless the sex is used to pursue mature and serious monogamous relationships. Since everyone knows she's married to Jerome, she's not a candidate. She wonders if she can overcome her loneliness by turning sex into a goal, like business. She answers personal ads in the newspaper, dials the telepersonal's dating hotline on the phone. This works. It's the shortest line between 2 points. She's surprised to find that in this world, she can be the belle of the ball, so long as she's not pursuing a committed and mature relationship. Giving blowjobs in the parking lot behind the House of Pies, finger-fucking on a stranger's couch. She's amazed by how completely sex annihilates the need for context. None of the men she meets this way see chemistry as a requisite for having sex. There's no dating, no auditioning for the girlfriend role. They encourage her to be a slut. She finds she can be anyone. It's all lighthearted, girlish fun. Through this lens, sex becomes a recreational pursuit like playing chess. Appearance, common interests, politics become completely immaterial. She finds this very liberating. So long as they are skilled and serious about the game, nearly anyone will do. But sometimes, when she's having great sex in Los Angeles, a thing Jerome encourages her to do, her mind wanders back in its hazy pre-orgasmic state to the torpid years they spent in Thurman. Pictures flash into her mind, a frozen waterfall, a walk along the Scrin River, the plaid blanket in a room they stayed in at the Tupper Lake Motel. Eventually she comes, or else her partner does, and she's slammed back into the present, breathless, grateful, and amazed. She'd never known that sex could be this easy. Another goal achieved. She forgets the orgasms quickly. It's only in the pre-orgasmic drift that she revisits the expectant emptiness she felt throughout those years of living with Jerome. Sylvie has already been living in LA for several years when she finds the picture Jerome took the day that she got pregnant at the Pennsylvania Reservoir. She finds it in a carton full of files and papers they'd boxed a million years ago, before the first round of year-long tenants moved into their Thurman house, the place they'd never managed to shape up into a home. All my dreams, the poet wrote, the bluest smoke. The photo is a strange artifact, a souvenir of possibilities that never came to be. Sylvia is no longer remotely like the woman in the picture, but you can tell by looking at the photo how much then she wanted to get pregnant. Desire pulsing underneath the mask of deep repose. When she finds the box, Jerome and all that she imagined for them has been lost to her for a long time. Take me anywhere, but take me now. It's a picture of complete abandonment. The woman in the picture is inescapably immersed in an expectant emptiness, the same emptiness that Sylvie likes to simulate by having recreational sex in LA. Safe in Highland Park, cheerfully pursuing a career in an art world that no longer matters much to her or anyone. She sees a link between her present life and the photo. Sylvie understands that her anonymous and finite, discrete sexual encounters are, to true romance, what the blank and open LA landscape is to the old European grid of history, warfare, and causality. There are no ancient tribal feuds, no wounds, no blood. It is less absolute, perhaps, but better. Thank you.